Far below the waves, in the silent darkness of the deep sea, there is a world most people will never see. It stretches across the planet like a great breathing mystery, a place where light fades into black and time itself seems to move slower. But long before the oceans looked like they do today, before whales and sharks and coral reefs, there was a different kind of sea, the deep sea of ancient Earth. If we could go back billions of years, to the time before continents had settled into shape, before mountains rose or forests grew, we would find an ocean unlike anything we know. The water would not be the same blue we see now. It would be darker, heavier, and full of strange minerals that gave it an otherworldly glow. The air above would be thick, full of volcanic smoke, and the waves would crash against raw rock and lava instead of sandy beaches. The sea was young, wild, and restless. Back then, there was no life in the form we recognize. No fish darting between coral, no whales singing in the distance, no kelp forests swaying gently in the currents. The deep ocean was empty, but not still. It churned with heat and energy. Volcanoes erupted beneath the water, releasing boiling minerals and gas. The Earth's crust was thin, constantly breaking and reforming, and in that chaos, the first deep basins began to form, the birthplaces of the deep-sea trenches that would one day reach 7 miles down. It's strange to think that life began not in the sunlight, but in the dark. In the shadows of hydrothermal vents, where the heat from the Earth's core met the cold of the ocean, something miraculous happened. Tiny chemical reactions began to take place, creating the first building blocks of life. No one knows exactly how it happened, but scientists believe that these vents, black smokers they're called, were like natural laboratories, mixing minerals, heat, and pressure into something living. The first cells, the first breath of life on Earth. So, when you think of the deep sea as silent and lifeless, remember, it was once the cradle of everything. Every living creature, from jellyfish to humans, can trace their lineage back to that darkness. The deep ocean was the first home. Over millions of years, that dark, chaotic water began to change. The constant rain of meteors slowed. The sky cleared. The Earth cooled just enough for the water to stabilize and for new forms of life to slowly take hold. Simple, microscopic organisms began to float near the surface, feeding on the weak light of the sun. Others stayed below, clinging to the vents, feeding on the minerals that poured out of the planet's heart. Life had found 2 homes, one in the light and one in the dark. Imagine floating in that early sea. There would be no color, no sound, only motion. The surface far above would shimmer faintly, like a silver mirror you could never reach. And beneath you, the world would stretch into black infinity. Strange plumes of boiling water would rise from the vents, shimmering with metallic colors. The floor would be rough and broken, shaped by forces no human hand could ever match. It was both terrifying and beautiful, a world built from heat and silence. And yet, in that strange stillness, something thrived. The first bacteria learned to use the energy from the vents to survive. They multiplied, spread, and adapted. Tiny organisms began forming colonies, covering the rocky sea floor like invisible carpets. Over time, the chemistry of the ocean changed, becoming richer and more complex. And from there, the slow, patient process of evolution began. A process that would one day fill the sea with creatures of every imaginable shape. The deep sea was not just a witness to this story. It was the stage on which it began. Even now, deep beneath the surface of today's oceans, there are places that haven't changed much since that ancient time. Scientists have sent robotic probes into the depths, discovering bacteria that live in total darkness, feeding on chemicals instead of sunlight. They're living fossils, reminders of a time when the deep sea ruled the Earth. It's almost poetic to think that the deepest, darkest part of our planet, the place most people fear, was once the source of all life. The deep doesn't destroy. It creates. It shelters. It protects its secrets. For billions of years it has watched species rise and fall, continents drift and collide, climates warm and freeze. Through it all, the deep sea remained, patient and silent, like the memory of the earth itself. And even now, it holds stories we've only begun to understand. Every layer of the ocean, from the sunlit shallows to the abyssal plains, is like a chapter in Earth's diary. The surface tells the story of change, of storms, of currents, of light, but the deep tells the story of time, slow, unbroken time. In the ancient deep, before the first fish, before even the concept of eyes or bones, there was only movement, tiny particles drifting, heat rising, minerals falling back down like snow. And yet, from that simple cycle, everything else would come. The coral reefs, the whales, the people standing on beaches wondering what lies beneath. Sometimes, late at night, when the world above grows quiet, it's easy to imagine the deep ocean breathing. The tide pulls, the water moves, and somewhere far below, unseen, life still glows in the dark, continuing a story that began long before we existed. That quiet pulse is older than civilization, older than the stars as we know them. It is the Earth's oldest song. So, as you listen to this story, remember that the deep sea isn't just a place. It's a memory, a whisper from the beginning of time, still echoing through the cold and the dark. And maybe, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear it, the heartbeat of the world, moving slowly beneath the waves. Long before there were clouds, rivers, or even a sky the color of blue, Earth was a place of fire. The ground was molten, glowing red and gold, and the air shimmered with heat. Volcanoes covered the planet, pouring out gas and ash, turning the world into a sea of smoke. It wasn't a place anyone could live. Not yet. There were no oceans, only scattered pools of boiling liquid trapped in craters of rock. But deep within the planet, water was hiding. Trapped in minerals, locked away since the beginning, it waited for the right moment to escape. And when the surface began to cool, when the volcanic storms started to calm, that hidden water rose slowly through the cracks of the young Earth. Steam filled the sky, clouds gathered, and for the first time it began to rain. Not a soft drizzle like the kind we know today. It rained for thousands of years, maybe millions. Endless sheets of water fell from the dark skies, pounding the ground, filling the low places, cooling the crust, and carving the first shapes of what would become continents. The sound would have been deafening. Imagine the roar of a million waterfalls, unbroken, falling from clouds of ash into rivers of lava. It was chaos, but it was creation. When the rain finally slowed, Earth had changed forever. The fire had given way to water. The first true oceans had formed, a vast, endless expanse that wrapped around the planet. The air above them shimmered with steam, and the sunlight that reached the surface was pale and red, filtered through dust and mist. The world was still wild, but it was beginning to breathe. Those first oceans were nothing like the calm blue waters we know now. They were dark, acidic, full of dissolved metals and minerals. Waves crashed against black volcanic rock. The surface hissed and bubbled with heat. It was an alien sea, but it was also the beginning of everything. The water brought balance. It cooled the land, softened the air, and allowed new chemical reactions to begin. The minerals from the rocks mixed with the elements dissolved in the sea, creating a strange, rich soup, something scientists now call the primordial ocean. It wasn't lifeless anymore. It was full of potential. If you could float there, drifting in that ancient water, you wouldn't see anything alive. Not yet. But beneath the surface, invisible changes were happening. Tiny molecules carried by the currents began to meet, collide, and connect. Some formed simple chains. Others folded into shapes that could store energy. And slowly, something began to stir. The early ocean became a playground of chemistry. Lightning struck the water, adding energy. Volcanoes released minerals that glowed faintly in the dark. The tides, pulled by the young moon, moved the water in endless cycles, mixing it again and again. And somewhere in all that motion, the first fragile spark of life appeared. It's hard to imagine, but every fish, every bird, every human being, every form of life on Earth can trace its story back to that ancient sea. We all began as part of the ocean's experiment, a result of countless tiny reactions that somehow built the first living cells. The sea wasn't just a setting, it was the artist. As the centuries passed, the ocean deepened. The tectonic plates below shifted and moved, opening new basins and closing old ones. The continents were small back then, scattered like islands of dark stone. They floated over a restless mantle, drifting and breaking apart. Sometimes entire regions sank beneath the waves, swallowed by the sea that had created them. Slowly, the world found a rhythm. The sun rose through the haze and the ocean began to sparkle. Winds swept across its surface, forming waves that rolled endlessly toward newborn shores. Rain continued to fall, feeding rivers that carved their way through the cooling rock. The air grew cleaner. The sky turned blue for the first time, and the deep sea, silent, dark, and ancient, settled into its place at the heart of the planet. It as humbling. To think that the same water falling as rain today is the same water that once filled those first oceans. The molecules in a single drop of rain could have existed in that ancient storm that cooled the earth. They could have been part of the wave that carried the first cell, the first breath of life. Water remembers. It carries the memory of the world. The ancient seas also shaped the face of the planet. They eroded mountains, carved valleys, and moved minerals across the continents. Every grain of sand on the beach today is a piece of that story, worn smooth by billions of years of tides. And beneath it all, the deep sea held the planet steady. It absorbed the heat, stored carbon, and created the balance that allowed life to grow. But even in that early time, the deep sea remained mysterious. The surface teemed with new possibilities, but the depths stayed dark, untouched, waiting. The pressure was immense, the cold unrelenting, but there was beauty in that stillness. The deep was like the earth's heartbeat, slow, steady, and hidden beneath the noise of creation. As the ages passed, life would rise to meet the light. Plants would appear, animals would follow, and the surface of the sea would become a stage for evolution. But the deep remained what it always was, eternal, watching, listening, waiting. Even now, when submarines dive into the darkest trenches, they enter that same world. The water there hasn't seen sunlight since the beginning of time. It moves slowly, guided by invisible currents that have been flowing since the earth was young. Every ripple, every shimmer of light from a creature's glow is part of a story that began billions of years ago, when the first raindrop fell and found its way into the sea. So, before the oceans we know today, before coral and whales and life as we understand it, there was just this, a restless planet, cooling, raining, and dreaming. A world learning to balance fire and water. And in that balance, something beautiful began. Because in the end, every story we tell about the sea, every myth, every discovery, every wave, is a story about beginnings. About how the earth found peace in the chaos. About how the deep sea, long before it became dark and silent, was once full of storms and promise. And that's where the story of life truly begins. In a world before color, before time, before memory. In a world that was only water. In the beginning, the ocean had layers of light. Near the surface, sunlight reached just far enough to make the water glow, a soft, shifting blue. But as you sank lower, the brightness faded, and the world turned dim, then dark, then completely black. That boundary between light and shadow became one of the most mysterious places in all of nature. And deeper still, beyond even that fading glow, lay the true deep, silent, eternal, and utterly dark, the first darkness. Back then, the deep sea wasn't the calm, quiet expanse we imagine today. It was raw and alive, shaped by forces still building the planet. Gases bubbled from cracks in the ocean floor. Lava poured out in glowing rivers that cooled instantly upon touching the cold water, creating strange, glassy formations. Superheated plumes of water burst from volcanic vents, rich with chemicals that hissed and swirled in clouds. It was a place of chaos and beauty, motion without sound, heat within cold, light born out of darkness. If you could have been there, floating far below the waves, it would have been an alien world. The pressure would crush almost anything we know. The water would be near freezing, except around the volcanic vents, where temperatures reached hundreds of degrees. The currents moved slowly, heavy with minerals, painting the seafloor in colors no sunlight had ever revealed. Silvers, golds, and blacks, shimmering faintly in the void. It's in that deep, strange silence that life began to find a home. The tiny, primitive cells that formed near the hydrothermal vents began to multiply, using the heat and chemicals around them for energy. These were the first organisms that didn't need sunlight. They didn't chase the warmth of the surface. They created their own way to live, feeding on the earth itself. That's something remarkable when you think about it. Even before light, before photosynthesis, before plants and plankton, life had already found a way. It learned to survive in total darkness, without seeing or breathing or moving as we do. The first life on Earth didn't need a sky. It needed only the deep. In time, these microorganisms formed colonies. Some grew into long, thread-like structures, anchored to the rocks near the vents. Others drifted freely, carried by the faint currents that moved like whispers through the black water. These simple beings began a chain of survival that has never broken. Every creature on Earth, in some distant way, carries a spark from those first cells. It's strange but comforting to imagine that the origin of life came from darkness. We often think of light as the source of creation, of warmth and energy and hope. But here, in the quiet deep, it was darkness that nurtured the first living things. It sheltered them, protected them, allowed them to grow slowly, patiently, without interference. As the ocean continued to change, the world above grew more stable. The sky cleared, the continents shifted, and sunlight began to reach further through the water. But the deep sea remained untouched. It became a sanctuary, a hidden realm where time moved differently and evolution took its own slow, deliberate path. Even today, when modern submersibles explore the deep, they find life that looks ancient, almost unchanged from those early forms. Strange tube worms that live in chemical vents, blind crustaceans with translucent shells, and jelly-like creatures that pulse softly in the dark. They don't rely on sunlight. They rely on chemistry, just like the first cells did billions of years ago. It's as if the deep sea kept a secret that the rest of the planet forgot. Imagine floating there now, suspended in silence. No color, no motion, only the faint hum of the earth beneath you. Occasionally, a flicker of light breaks the darkness, a bioluminescent creature drifting by, glowing with its own internal fire. A faint blue spark, a pulse of green, a ghostly shimmer. Each light is a message, a survival strategy, a reminder that even in the deepest dark, life finds ways to shine. These flashes of light are ancient, older than stars in the sky as we see them now. Bioluminescence might be one of the oldest languages of the planet, a conversation that began billions of years ago between creatures of the deep, long before eyes existed to witness it. The first darkness wasn't empty. It was full of creation. But it was a kind of creation that didn't shout or burn. It whispered. It glowed. It built slowly, molecule by molecule, generation by generation. Life was patient. It didn't need to rush because in the deep sea, time doesn't hurry. The water down there moves differently. It's heavy, slow, and full of memory. Each current carries traces of minerals from ancient volcanoes, of gases from the Earth's core, of salt that has been part of the ocean since it began. The deep sea isn't just part of the earth, it is the earth in motion. And perhaps that's why humans find it so mysterious, even now. We build machines to explore it, but every answer brings more questions. We look for light, for color, for things we can understand, but the deep doesn't give up its secrets easily. It was here before us, and it will remain long after. In the story of our planet, the first darkness was not the end. It was the beginning. From that endless black, from the pressure and heat and silence came the foundation of everything that would follow. When you think of the deep sea now, cold, quiet, and vast, remember that it's not just a place beneath the ocean. It's the memory of the first moment life began to breathe. The darkness of the deep isn't emptiness, it's history. And as you drift, listening to the quiet, imagine the soft pulse of that early ocean, the faint shimmer of unseen light, the beginning of all beginnings, still echoing softly beneath the waves. At first, the deep sea was quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive, heavy, steady, endless. But in that silence, something small began to stir. The first living things were not animals or plants, or even anything that would look alive to our eyes. They were tiny, simple, and unseen, little bubbles of chemistry drifting in the dark, learning slowly how to survive. It's strange to think of life before movement, before fins or wings or even hunger. The first life didn't swim or chase or grow. It simply existed, floating near volcanic vents, feeding on the faint energy that leaked from the Earth's crust. The deep ocean was their home, a quiet black nursery where time didn't hurry. The vents glowed faintly in the darkness, like lanterns scattered across the ocean floor. Around them, clouds of shimmering minerals rose and fell, and within those clouds, the first cells multiplied. Some learned how to capture energy more efficiently. Others formed fragile membranes to protect themselves from the cold. Each tiny change was a step forward, invisible but important. Evolution was beginning, one heartbeat at a time. These early organisms are known today as chemosynthetic bacteria. Instead of sunlight, they used chemicals, hydrogen sulfide, methane, and minerals, to make energy. In the modern world, we think of life as something that depends on light. But these creatures proved that life could begin in total darkness, that it didn't need a sky or warmth or color. It only needed balance and time. Slowly, new shapes appeared. Some bacteria began clustering together, forming mats on the rocks. Others drifted upward, carried by gentle underwater currents. These movements, simple as they were, changed everything. The ocean was no longer empty. It was alive, even if that life was too small to see. It's peaceful to imagine it, a vast black sea, motionless but full of unseen energy. The surface above glittering faintly with lightning, the deep below glowing softly from volcanic light. Between those worlds, tiny forms of life multiplied in quiet rhythm, unaware that they were beginning a story that would one day fill the earth. As time passed, billions of years of slow change unfolded. Some of those single-celled creatures began to cooperate. They formed colonies, clusters that shared energy and resources. Cooperation became survival, and in that unity, something new was born. The first complex cells, capable of storing information, adapting, and passing it on. With every generation, the ocean grew richer. Nutrients from volcanic eruptions mixed with minerals and chemicals, creating a perfect balance. The surface currents carried heat and particles, feeding the depths. And in those depths, life diversified. Some cells learned to move by flicking tiny filaments, the first motion in the sea. Others developed tougher walls to survive pressure and heat. Each adaptation opened new possibilities. We can't see those changes now, but the evidence still exists. In the fossilized remains of microbial mats found in ancient rock, and in the DNA of every living thing on Earth. Hidden within our own cells are echoes of those first organisms, the blueprints passed down through eons. The deep sea became a world of invisible architecture. Layers of bacteria formed carpets over rocks, each layer feeding on the waste of another. In this cycle of life and decay, the ocean became self-sustaining. For the first time, energy was being recycled, one life feeding another endlessly. And still, it all happened in silence. No light, no sound, no movement that we would recognize. Just the faint bubbling of gases, the soft shimmer of minerals, and the patient rhythm of growth. It's easy to forget, but even now, most of Earth's living space is still the deep sea. Most of life happens where sunlight cannot reach. That fact connects the modern ocean to its ancient past, a reminder that darkness has always been more alive than we think. The creatures that came later, the trilobites, the jellyfish, the ammonites, the whales, they all owe their existence to these first tiny beings. Without them, there would be no food chains, no oxygen, no balance. Every breath we take, every bite of food, every wave in the sea, all of it begins here, with those fragile microbes that learn to live without light. Sometimes scientists call this the first ecology. It wasn't complex, but it was perfect, a circle of creation and decay that never stopped. When one organism died, another grew from it. And slowly, very slowly, the cycle began to reach upward, toward the surface. The ocean, once a silent world, began to hum with chemical energy. Imagine standing at the edge of a black cliff on the ocean floor. Around you, vents glow like stars. Plumes of heat rise like smoke, and all around, billions of microscopic lives are drifting, feeding, dividing, changing. It's not chaos anymore. It's balance. The first order. Even after all these ages, the same kind of life still exists down there. Near hydrothermal vents in the Pacific and Atlantic, scientists have found thriving communities. Crabs, worms, and fish, all living off the energy that comes from the earth, not the sun. It's as if the first chapter of life never ended. It just kept going quietly in the background, untouched by time. That's the wonder of the deep sea. It remembers. The creatures there are living fossils, echoes of the planet's childhood. They remind us that life doesn't need light to find beauty. Sometimes it just needs warmth, minerals, and patience. And so, the deep sea became Earth's first kingdom, invisible, silent, eternal. From that kingdom, all other forms of life would rise. The shallow oceans, the coral reefs, the jungles, the skies, all of them began as whispers in the dark. The first life below wasn't spectacular. It was humble. But in that humility lay power. The power to endure, to evolve, to adapt. The kind of power that still shapes the planet today. And maybe, when you close your eyes and listen to the sound of the ocean, that's what you're really hearing. Not just waves and water, but the oldest heartbeat in the world. The deep remembering itself. The deep ocean as we know it today wasn't always there. In the beginning, Earth's seafloor was shallow, uneven, and restless. Beneath the early waters, the planet was still growing, still shifting, its surface constantly cracking and folding like paper in a storm. What we now call the abyss, those vast dark plains and bottomless trenches, had to be built piece by piece over eons of movement and fire. It began with the Earth's crust, thin and fragile compared to the thick stone beneath. This crust was made of plates, enormous slabs of rock that floated on the molten mantle below. They moved slowly, almost too slowly to notice, but their movement changed everything. They collided, pulled apart, and slipped past one another, shaping the face of the planet. When two plates pushed together, mountains rose above the sea. When they pulled apart, deep valleys opened beneath it. These valleys filled with water and sank deeper with time, creating the first ocean basins. Every inch of the deep-sea floor that exists today, every trench, ridge, and plain, was formed by this endless, quiet motion. It's strange to imagine such violence happening so silently. Entire mountain ranges rising and collapsing beneath miles of water, continents drifting like ghosts, the seafloor stretching and tearing open. All of it happening far below, unseen, in perfect stillness. The earth was sculpting itself, not with haste, but with patience. As these slow movements continued, heat from inside the planet escaped through cracks in the crust. Magma seeped out, cooled, and hardened, forming new rock. Over time, this process created long, winding mountain ranges beneath the sea, what we now call mid-ocean ridges. They snake across the ocean floor for tens of thousands of miles, silent and unseen, like scars left by the planet's own heartbeat. Near these ridges, the crust is thin and warm. Here, hydrothermal vents pour out boiling water rich with minerals, feeding entire ecosystems that thrive in the dark. Further away, the crust grows older, colder, and heavier, slowly sinking into the mantle. This is where the deep trenches form, long, narrow cuts that reach miles below the surface. The deepest of them all, the Mariana Trench, would eventually reach a depth of nearly 11 kilometers, a place so remote and pressurized that sunlight will never touch it. But in ancient times, before any names or measurements existed, these changes happened unnoticed. The deep sea was young, still finding its shape. Each eruption, each tremor, each ripple of magma added a new layer of story. The water above cooled the lava quickly, turning it into smooth, glassy stone. Over the ages, sediments began to fall. Dust from volcanic ash, fragments of rock, and the remains of microscopic life drifting down from the surface. Slowly, the ocean floor became a graveyard and a cradle at once. It's easy to forget that the bottom of the ocean is not fixed. It moves, breathes, and changes just like the world above. The sea floor spreads at ridges and disappears into trenches, recycling itself every few 100 million years. The deep ocean is ancient, but not eternal. It renews itself, quietly, invisibly, beneath our feet. Imagine standing, if it were possible, on that early sea floor. Around you, the darkness would be endless. The walls of newly formed ridges would rise like cliffs into the blackness, their surfaces still hot from magma. Streams of shimmering minerals would pour from cracks in the stone. In the distance, faint plumes of gas would twist like smoke. The silence would be total. Not empty, but vast. The kind of silence that hums faintly with energy. As the planet cooled, the oceans deepened. The tectonic plates continued to move, and the continents drifted slowly apart, changing the shape of the Earth's face. New basins formed where there had been land, and water rushed in to fill them. The world became a patchwork of seas, connected by deep channels. The ancient ocean was no longer a single body. It was many, each with its own depth, its own currents, its own secrets. And yet, beneath all that movement, one truth remained. The deep sea was becoming the planet's memory. Everything that lived and died above eventually found its way down. The shells of tiny plankton, the bones of fish, the dust of continents. They settled gently on the ocean floor, layer after layer, year after year, until they became part of the Earth itself. The deep was turning into a living archive, keeping record of everything that had ever happened on the surface. That's what makes the deep sea so remarkable. It doesn't forget. Every grain of sand, every drop of water carries a story written in pressure and time. And as the seafloor spread and folded, it carried those stories with it, burying some, revealing others, always changing, never still. Sometimes, when scientists drill into the ocean floor today, they find layers of ancient clay or rock that still hold traces of the world as it once was. Tiny fossils, chemical signatures, whispers of extinct oceans. Each layer is a chapter in Earth's long history, pressed flat by time, sealed in silence. If you listen closely, you might almost hear it, the slow movement of continents, the deep rumble of magma beneath the crust, the steady rhythm of creation and destruction. It's not loud, but it's constant. It's the sound of the planet building itself, one heartbeat every 1,000 years. And somewhere in that rhythm, life adapted. Creatures began to sink deeper, following food and safety into the growing abyss. The deep sea, once empty and barren, became a refuge, a place where life could endure even as the surface world changed. By the time the modern continents began to take shape, the deep ocean had already become what it would remain forever: vast, silent, and unknowable. It had its mountains, its plains, its trenches, an entire world beneath the world. So when you look at the ocean today and imagine what lies below, remember that the deep wasn't always there. It was built slowly, by a living earth that never stopped moving. The seafloor beneath your feet, or beneath the waves, is younger than you think, always renewing, always shifting, always alive. It's easy to think of the ocean as timeless, but the truth is gentler and stranger. The deep sea was born in slow motion, out of fire and darkness, shaped by patience and silence. And somewhere in that slow birth, life learned to listen. For millions of years, the deep ocean had been quiet. It was a world of drifting microbes and soft-bodied creatures, fragile and slow, glowing gently in the dark. But slowly, the balance began to change. Life was learning new tricks. Movement, sight, hunger, and with hunger came the first hunters. The Paleozoic seas, hundreds of millions of years ago, were like an alien dream. The water shimmered with strange light. The sea floor was covered with forests of coral-like sponges and soft worms. Tiny trilobites crawled along the mud, leaving trails that vanished in the currents. Above them drifted jelly-like creatures, translucent and quiet. It looked peaceful, but it wasn't. Something new had begun. The first arms race in nature. It started small. Some creatures developed stronger shells to protect themselves. Others grew spikes or learned to burrow into the sand. But a few took a different path. They became predators. They developed jaws, claws, and eyes that could see movement in the dim light. The deep sea, once ruled by stillness, began to tremble with motion. One of the earliest and most fearsome of these predators was the Anomalocaris, a name that means strange shrimp. It lived more than 500 million years ago, and it was unlike anything before it. Nearly a meter long, enormous for its time, it had a round, toothed mouth like a blender, and two long, spiked arms that reached out to grab prey. Its eyes were large, adapted for the faint light of the deep, and its body moved with the grace of a ribbon, gliding through the water like a ghost. To the small, soft creatures of the Cambrian seas, it was unstoppable. As strange as it sounds, Anomalocaris wasn't alone. The Cambrian explosion, a burst of evolution unlike anything before or since, filled the oceans with new life almost overnight. In a geological blink, the sea went from simple microbes to complex creatures with skeletons, muscles, and senses. The deep became a place of endless invention. There were predators shaped like armored discs, worms with grasping jaws, and tiny fish-like animals with bony plates. Each one was experimenting with survival, learning how to hunt, how to hide, how to move. The balance of the deep was changing forever. As the ages passed, new creatures took the place of the old. The trilobites flourished, crawling in great numbers across the sea floor, their shells gleaming under the faint light that filtered down. Some were scavengers, some grazers, and some, surprisingly, hunters themselves. Their compound eyes could detect motion even in the shadows, and their strong legs let them dig quickly into the sand. Then came the giant cephalopods, distant ancestors of today's squid and octopuses. They were among the first truly large predators of the deep. With long tentacles, jet-propelled bodies, and eyes that could pierce the dark, they ruled the seas for millions of years. One of the most impressive was Camerocaras, a massive creature up to 30 feet long with a spiral shell and a beak strong enough to crush armor. The ocean, once silent and slow, now pulsed with energy. Prey fled. Hunters pursued. The deep sea became a battlefield of evolution. But even amid the chaos, there was beauty. The water was filled with color, not sunlight, but bioluminescence. Many deep-sea creatures learned to make their own light, glowing in patterns that signaled danger, attraction, or confusion. Some used light to lure prey closer. Others flashed to disappear into the black. In a world without day or night, light became language. Deeper still, where no sunlight reached at all, life adapted in even stranger ways. Some creatures grew enormous to survive the pressure. Others became small and slow, conserving energy in the cold. Their shapes defied logic, translucent, elongated, ribbon-like, or armored. The deep had no rules, and evolution took advantage of that. As millions of years passed, new rulers rose. Fish began to appear, their skeletons made of bone instead of cartilage. They swam with precision and speed, their fins steering them through the murky waters. Some grew jaws capable of swallowing prey whole. Others developed armor-plated scales for defense. Among them were the Dunkleosteus, one of the most terrifying creatures ever to swim the earth, seas, a predator as long as a bus, with jaws that could crush through bone in an instant. Imagine that, the dark waters trembling as a massive shape passes overhead, the faint light glinting off metal-like plates, a flash of jaws, and then silence. No sound, no scream, only the soft vibration of water closing again. The deep sea was never kind, but it was always fair. And yet, even in this dangerous world, balance found a way. For every predator, there was prey. For every giant, there were millions of small lives drifting quietly in the current. Plankton, worms, and tiny crustaceans that filled the ocean like dust in the air. Life in the deep became a cycle. Birth, hunt, death, decay, repeating endlessly, layer upon layer, feeding the world above. The monsters of the Paleo-Deep may seem like nightmares now, but in their time they were pioneers. They tested the limits of what life could be. They gave rise to the first ecosystems. Communities of creatures, each playing a role, each connected. Without them, there would be no whales, no sharks, no humans. The deep taught life how to adapt, how to struggle, and how to endure. Over time, many of those ancient hunters vanished. Extinction is as much a part of the ocean's story as creation. The Anomalocaris, the Dunkleosteus, the armored fish and shelled predators all faded into the fossil record. But their legacy remains, written in the DNA of every predator that came after. Even now, if you look at a squid's graceful motion, or the way a shark glides through the water, you can see their echoes. The same curiosity, the same quiet hunger. The deep sea remembers its monsters, even if the surface has forgotten. So when you imagine the ancient ocean, don't picture silence. Picture movement. Picture light flashing in darkness, shells scraping over stone, the soft ripple of fins through cold water. Picture a world alive, wild, and beautiful. A world where the first monsters swam not out of evil, but out of need. Because in the deep, survival was never cruel. It was simply the rhythm of life, played out in perfect balance. By the time the Paleozoic seas gave way to the Mesozoic era, the world had transformed beyond recognition. Continents drifted apart, volcanoes reshaped the coasts, and the climate grew warm and humid. The deep ocean, once ruled by armored fish and strange predators, was now ready for giants. This was the time when the sea became home to creatures of impossible size and grace, reptiles, fish, and cephalopods that dominated every layer of the water. From the shallow coastal lagoons to the pitch-black trenches, life had learned to go big, and the deep, always patient, made room for them. The warm oceans of the Mesozoic were rich in oxygen and teeming with plankton. the perfect foundation for enormous predators. Among the first to rise were the ichthyosaurs, ancient marine reptiles that looked almost like modern dolphins, though far larger. They had sleek, torpedo-shaped bodies, massive eyes for seeing in dim light, and jaws lined with needle-like teeth perfect for catching fish and squid. Some species grew up to 50 feet long. They weren't just large, they were fast. Imagine one gliding silently through the deep blue water, sunlight fading above, shadows flickering below. Its movement is effortless, a smooth rhythm that leaves no trace. In its enormous eye, light bends and glimmers, a reflection of a world both ancient and alive. Then came the plesiosaurs, the long-necked hunters of myth and fossil legend. With their tiny heads, elongated necks, and flipper-like limbs, they moved through the water like elegant ghosts. Some scientists believe their necks allowed them to sneak up on schools of fish, darting their small heads forward before the prey even realized what was happening. Others think they glided slowly, using their massive bodies to drift through open water, patient and deliberate. While they ruled the mid-depths, another kind of predator was rising closer to the surface. The mosasaurs. They were not gentle swimmers. These were apex hunters, immense lizards that returned to the sea after evolving on land. Picture a creature the size of a bus, with the body of a crocodile, flippers instead of legs, and a tail made for speed. Its jaws could open wide enough to swallow prey whole, including other marine reptiles. The mosasaur's bite was among the most powerful in prehistoric seas. Fossils show their teeth marks on the bones of turtles, fish, and even other mosasaurs. In the late Cretaceous, they were the rulers of the ocean, as fearsome in their realm as the Tyrannosaurus was on land. But not all giants hunted. The deep sea also became home to the colossal ammonites, ancient relatives of squids and octopuses protected by spiral shells that could grow as large as a human. They floated through the water using jets of air trapped in their shells, moving slowly, peacefully like drifting lanterns. Their tentacles reached out to catch plankton or small fish, and their shells shimmered faintly in the filtered light. Some ammonite fossils still show traces of iridescence, hints of color that once glowed under the prehistoric sun. It's strange to imagine that such enormous life thrived in a world that, to us, seems almost hostile. But for millions of years, these creatures flourished. The oceans were their kingdom, vast, warm, and filled with abundance. And below them, in the dark trenches where sunlight never reached, stranger beings stirred. Deep-sea fish evolved to survive in crushing pressure and near-freezing cold. Some glowed with light of their own. Others developed enormous jaws to swallow prey whole, even if it was larger than themselves. The deep ocean was a mirror. As life grew larger above, it adapted in secret below. Everywhere you looked, size had become an advantage. Bigger lungs meant deeper dives, longer fins meant more efficient movement, stronger jaws meant survival. The age of giants wasn't just about being large. It was about mastering the balance of energy, movement, and endurance. But even in this era of power, there was elegance. Fossils show that ichthyosaurs gave birth to live young, a gentle reminder that even the fiercest hunters had moments of tenderness. Mothers likely swam to shallower waters to protect their offspring, guiding them upward to take their first breath of air. It's an image that connects us across time. Life, fragile and determined, enduring even in the age of monsters. Yet, as with every age before it, balance shifted again. The seas grew colder, tectonic plates moved, reshaping the continents and closing off warm, shallow waters. Food sources dwindled. Some giants adapted, others did not. The ichthyosaurs, after millions of years of domination, vanished mysteriously. The ammonites faded. Even the mighty mosasaurs disappeared with the mass extinction that ended the age of dinosaurs. And in their place, new creatures began to rise, smaller, faster, more efficient. The deep sea, as always, remained. It watched the giants come and go, kept their bones in silence and turned their bodies into memory. Even now, the ocean floor holds their story. Fossilized bones lie scattered across ancient seabeds, vertebrae the size of dinner plates, teeth like daggers, shells that still shimmer faintly after 100 million years. The Earth remembers its giants, even if we can only imagine them now. And when you stand by the ocean at night, hearing the waves crash softly under the moonlight, it's not hard to picture them still there somewhere deep below. Shadows gliding in the dark echoes of the creatures that once ruled the world. Perhaps that's why the ocean still feels mysterious, even today. It's not just the darkness or the depth, it's the memory. The weight of all the life that came before us, still moving, still whispering, just beyond the reach of light. The age of giants did not end in fire or fury at first. It ended in silence. The oceans, once alive with the constant movement of enormous creatures, began to still. The great marine reptiles, the ammonites, the powerful fish, all the wonders that had ruled the Mesozoic seas, were fading, one by one, as if the ocean itself were closing its eyes. It began slowly. Climate was changing. The Earth's continents were drifting into new shapes, and the great seas that had once been warm and shallow began to cool. Currents shifted. The deep ocean, which had been calm and steady for millions of years, started to stir differently. Nutrients no longer flowed the same way. Food chains began to weaken. The giants that depended on abundance began to starve. The ichthyosaurs, those elegant dolphin-like hunters that had ruled for so long, were among the first to disappear. Fossil evidence suggests that their numbers declined long before the great extinction that would later claim so much life. They may have been outcompeted by smaller, more adaptable fish and reptiles, or perhaps they simply couldn't keep up with the changing climate. Whatever the reason, they vanished quietly, leaving behind only their bones, perfectly preserved in the stone of ancient sea floors. Next came the ammonites, those beautiful spiraled creatures that had floated through prehistoric seas like living ornaments. For millions of years, they had survived everything the Earth threw at them. Volcanic eruptions, changing tides, and even earlier extinctions. But at the end of the Cretaceous, their time finally ran out. When the asteroid struck the Earth, the same catastrophe that ended the reign of the dinosaurs on land, the oceans were thrown into chaos. Massive tsunamis tore across continents. Dust filled the sky, blocking sunlight for years. The plankton that fed the seas began to die, and with them went the creatures that relied on them. The ammonites, once masters of survival, had nothing left to eat. One by one, their shells fell to the ocean floor, drifting down like quiet snow. The mosasaurs, those terrifying sea lizards that had ruled the coasts, suffered too. Without sunlight, the food web collapsed. Smaller fish disappeared, and the great predators followed. Some may have tried to adapt, swimming deeper in search of prey, but the cold and darkness of the deep were not their home. Within a few thousand years, a heartbeat in geological time, they were gone. It's hard to imagine an ocean without its giants. For tens of millions of years, the seas had echoed with movement, fins slicing through water, tails propelling enormous bodies with ease. But after the extinction, the deep returned to a kind of emptiness it hadn't known since the beginning. For a while, the ocean was quiet again. The silence must have been heavy, a stillness that reached from the surface to the deepest trenches. The bones of giants settled on the seafloor, layer upon layer, turning into fossils that would one day tell their story. Above them, new life began to take shape, smaller, swifter, cautious. From the ashes of that catastrophe, the ancestors of today's marine life began to rise. Tiny fish, shellfish, and early mammals found their place in the new ocean. The rules had changed. Strength was no longer in size, but in adaptation. The deep sea, with its stability and quiet, became a refuge for many of these survivors. It's almost poetic, how life always finds a way back. The earth cooled, the skies cleared, and the seas once again filled with motion. But the giants never returned in the same way. Their bones were left behind, reminders of a world that once was, a world that proved even the strongest could fall. If you were to dive into those ancient seas right after the extinction, it would be eerie. The water would still be cloudy from ash and dust. The coral reefs would be gray and broken. You might drift past the skeleton of an ammonite, its shell cracked but still beautiful, or the tooth of a mosasaur half buried in the sand. The ocean would feel hollow, like a theater after the play had ended. The lights dim, the audience gone. But even then, tiny signs of new life would flicker. Microbes would begin feeding on the remains. Small fish would explore the ruins. The first rays of sunlight returning to the surface would sparkle faintly across the water. Slowly, quietly, life would begin again. The fall of the giants reminds us that the ocean, no matter how vast, is fragile. It changes, forgets, and renews. Every rise comes with a fall, every dominance with an end. The ammonites, the ichthyosaurs, the mosasaurs, they weren't failures. They were chapters. Their disappearance made room for something new, something that would eventually lead to whales, dolphins, and all the wonders we see today. And so, the deep sea kept their memory. Over time, sediment covered their bones, pressing them into stone. The ocean became their tomb and their storyteller. Millions of years later, when humans began to dig through ancient rock, we found them. Fossils that whispered of worlds long lost beneath the waves. Even now, if you stand at the edge of the sea and listen to the sound of the waves, there's a strange familiarity in it, like an echo from the past. The rhythm of the tide, the pull of the current, the deep, low hum of the water. It's the same song the ocean sang when the giants fell. It's a hum that says, "Nothing lasts forever, but everything leaves a trace." After the fall of the giants, the world entered an age of quiet. The skies slowly cleared from the clouds of ash, the earth cooled, and the deep sea returned to its endless rhythm. It was an age without thunder, without massive tails breaking the surface, without colossal jaws tearing through schools of fish. The ocean had gone still, but not empty. Beneath the silence, life was beginning again. The age of shadows, as scientists might call it, wasn't truly dark. It was dim, gentle, cautious. It was a time of survivors. The great predators were gone, but countless small, unnoticed creatures remained. Microscopic plankton drifted freely in the upper layers of the water, catching sunlight and multiplying. Crabs scuttled over the ocean floor, scavenging what was left. Tiny fish hid in coral fragments, and small cephalopods, ancestors of today, squids and cuttlefish, pulsed through the water like floating ghosts. In this stillness, the deep sea became a sanctuary. Life that couldn't survive in the chaos above found safety below. The deep ocean, far from sunlight and storms, remained stable when everything else changed. Pressure and darkness had always ruled there, but now they became protection. Species that could adapt to the cold and live slowly began to thrive. It is strange to think that the greatest collapse in Earth as history gave birth to one of its quietest, most peaceful ages. The seas were calm for millions of years. Evolution slowed down, not out of weakness, but patience. The ocean seemed to be thinking, breathing, waiting. In the shallower seas, new forms of life began to rise. Small mammals that ventured near the coast, birds that learned to dive for fish, and reptiles that remained in lagoons. The deep sea, however, was not touched by these changes. It stayed timeless, a shadowy world unchanged by the shifting continents above. If you could descend into those ancient depths, you'd see something mesmerizing. Forests of strange corals growing in the dark, pale as bone. Fish with huge, unblinking eyes gliding silently past. Long, thin worms waving from cracks in the rocks. And, here and there, faint glimmers of light, bioluminescence, glowing like stars beneath the waves. These tiny lights were one of evolution's most beautiful answers to the darkness. Some creatures glowed to attract prey, others to communicate, and some to scare away hunters. It was an invisible language that turned the blackness into a quiet constellation of living stars. The deep sea, once filled with roaring giants, had become a cosmic dreamscape, an ocean of whispers and light. And while the surface world changed dramatically, continents moving, climates warming and cooling, the deep stayed the same. Its creatures adapted not to change, but to constancy. They grew slower, longer-lived, and efficient. Some of the species that evolved in this era are still here today, almost unchanged. The coelacanth, the horseshoe crab, and the ghostly jellyfish that have floated through the oceans for hundreds of millions of years. The Age of Shadows was not about extinction anymore. It was about balance. Every creature had its role, no matter how small. Scavengers fed on the remains of the dead, plankton fed on light, and deep-sea predators drifted patiently in the black, waiting for something to cross their path. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel it. That slow rhythm. The faint current brushing against coral. The soft flicker of glowing plankton. The heartbeat of the ocean, steady and calm. But this peace would not last forever. Earth never stays still for long. Deep below the ocean floor, heat was building. Tectonic plates shifted, continents moved closer again, and volcanic ridges spread across the sea floor. The ocean was preparing for another transformation, one that would bring warmth, new currents, and entirely new forms of life. Still, for millions of years, the deep remained unchanged. It was a pause between eras, a time when the planet seemed to breathe before beginning again. The silence was not empty. It was sacred. If there's something timeless about the ocean, it's this: its ability to recover, to reinvent itself. It doesn't resist change, it absorbs it. The deep remembers every extinction, every rebirth, every creature that has come and gone. And even in its darkest times, life has always found a way to glow. That's what makes this age so fascinating. Not the giants that ruled before, but the quiet strength that came after. The tiny, patient survivors that rebuilt the world one heartbeat at a time. The creatures of the Age of Shadows may not have been powerful or grand, but they were the foundation of everything that would follow, including us. Because without them, the ocean might never have recovered. The deep might have stayed silent forever. But it didn't. It waited, and when the time was right, it began to breathe again. After millions of years of quiet, the earth began to move again. Deep beneath the crust, molten rock pushed upward, breaking apart continents and reshaping coastlines. New oceans opened like slow, glowing scars across the planet's surface. It was as if the earth, after a long breath, exhaled and started to dream again. This was a time of renewal. The deep sea, once a refuge of stillness, began to pulse with new energy. Warmth from the planet's core rose through the ocean floor, creating new hydrothermal vents, fountains of mineral-rich water that turned the black abyss into strange gardens. Around these vents, life bloomed. Tiny bacteria thrived in the boiling heat, feeding on the chemicals that burst from the cracks. Tube worms, blind shrimp, and other bizarre creatures gathered around, glowing faintly in the dark like an underwater campfire. It's hard to imagine, but this was the deep sea's second creation story. Billions of years after life first appeared near ancient vents, it was happening again. Not at the surface, but far below, in the darkest places of the world. Life was rebuilding itself from the bottom up. Meanwhile, above these quiet depths, the Earth's continents drifted apart. The Atlantic Ocean began to open, the Pacific stretched wider. The planet's shape changed slowly, but the effect on the oceans was profound. New currents formed, connecting parts of the world that had never touched before. Cold water from the poles began to sink deep into the sea, while warm water flowed across the equator. For the first time in ages, the deep ocean had circulation, a global heartbeat. That flow changed everything. Nutrients buried in the seafloor began to rise again, feeding new blooms of plankton near the surface. The air filled with oxygen. fish evolved to chase these new food sources, and the deep became a nursery for future giants. The ocean was no longer still. It was alive again in every sense. Down below, the deep sea adapted to these new rhythms. Animals that had once lived slowly began to change. Some developed larger eyes to see in the shifting darkness. Others became bioluminescent hunters, using flashes of light to attract prey. The food web grew more complex, linking the smallest microbes to the largest predators. It was beautiful to think about how every movement of the planet shaped this, how the drift of continents and the spin of the earth created the ocean as music. The deep wasn't just a place anymore. It was a living system, breathing with the planet itself. And while most of this life happened out of sight, its effects reached everywhere. The plankton that grew in those new oceans began releasing oxygen into the atmosphere, balancing the air we breathe today. The carbon they absorbed was buried in the ocean floor, shaping the planet's climate. Every wave, every current, every creature was part of an enormous, slow harmony that made the world habitable again. If you could float above those newborn oceans, you'd see continents glowing red from volcanic activity, smoke rising from fissures where new crust was forming. The water near those shores would shimmer with minerals, colored green and gold by sunlight filtering through ash. But beneath it all, in the deep, the world would be still and dark except for those faint glowing vents. There, life thrived in secret, patient as ever. And this was when some of the ancestors of modern whales, sharks, and deep-sea fish began their evolutionary journeys. Small, nimble creatures learned to hunt in low light. Others learned to migrate, traveling long distances following the new ocean currents. The ocean, once fragmented, had become a connected world. The deep, which had once kept its secrets, began sharing them again, exchanging nutrients, energy, and life between its layers. The earth had found a rhythm again, and for the first time since the fall of the giants, the ocean truly flourished. Still, it wasn't peaceful everywhere. The same geological forces that gave life new oceans also caused destruction. Volcanic eruptions sent ash clouds across the sky. Underwater earthquakes triggered tsunamis that reshaped coastlines. But from every disaster came renewal. Coral reefs began to grow in warm, shallow seas. Kelp forests appeared along rocky shores. Life, as always, found beauty and balance. The deep sea, however, remained patient. It watched as new species evolved, as sunlight danced across the surface, and as the earth continued to change. For all its motion, the deep stayed constant, the quiet memory beneath the noise of creation. Perhaps that's what makes it so eternal. The surface of the world changes. Mountains rise, continents split, species come and go, but the deep remains, a dark mirror reflecting the soul of the planet. And so, the birth of new oceans wasn't just a geological event. It was a rebirth of life itself, a reminder that even after destruction, the world knows how to begin again, not with chaos, but with patience. Imagine the stillness of it. Miles beneath the waves, volcanic light glows like candle flames. Strange creatures drift past, their bodies shimmering with faint blue light. A slow current moves through the dark, carrying whispers of the ancient world forward into the new. The deep doesn't forget. It transforms. Millions of years after the fall of the sea reptiles, the oceans were quiet again. The world was warm, the continents had taken on familiar shapes, and life was thriving in every corner of the planet. Forests covered the land, birds filled the skies, and mammals, small, clever, and adaptable, began to rule where the dinosaurs once had. But evolution, as always, had one more surprise waiting beneath the waves. Some of those early mammals lived along the coasts. They hunted for fish in shallow water, wading in with their long legs and narrow snouts. They were called pakicetids, creatures that looked a bit like wolves but with the curiosity of something half drawn to the sea. No one could have guessed that these awkward, dog-sized animals would become the ancestors of whales. At first, they hunted at the water's edge, catching fish and small crustaceans. But generation by generation, they began to spend more time in the water, swimming farther, diving deeper. Their legs became stronger for paddling. Their bodies grew sleeker. The ocean, it seemed, was calling them home. Over millions of years, pachycetids evolved into ambulocetids, the walking whales. These creatures could still move on land, though clumsily, but in water they were graceful, like crocodiles gliding through the shallows. Fossils show long, powerful tails and webbed feet, halfway between a hunter on land and a swimmer of the deep. It's strange to imagine that transition. A creature that still breathes air, still gives birth on land, yet feels more alive beneath the surface. Evolution doesn't rush. It whispers, gently shaping the body to fit the environment. And as time passed, those early whales followed the current into deeper waters. The earth was changing again. Oceans grew richer in life, full of new kinds of fish, squid, and plankton. For mammals that could swim and dive, it was a feast waiting to be claimed. The next step in whale evolution happened fast, in the grand scale of time. The Basilosaurus appeared, long, serpent-like, and fully aquatic. It was one of the first whales that no longer needed the land at all. Unlike modern whales, Basilosaurus still had small hind limbs, tiny and useless, reminders of its ancient past. But its body, long and sleek, stretching up to 60 feet, was built for life in the ocean. Its sharp teeth could tear through fish and even smaller whales. For the first time since the age of the mosasaurs, the deep had new rulers. The ocean welcomed them. Whales adapted to pressure, to cold, to vast distances. Their lungs became more efficient. Their hearing sharpened until they could sense sound across miles of water. They began to communicate through echoes and songs that rippled through the deep, the first voices in an ocean that had been silent for so long. And as they evolved, they diversified. Some became hunters, ancestors of today's orcas and sperm whales. Others took a gentler path, feeding on plankton and small creatures. These became the baleen whales, massive yet peaceful, using comb-like plates in their mouths to filter entire clouds of tiny life from the sea. The rise of whales changed the ocean forever. They were more than predators. They were gardeners of the sea. Their movements stirred nutrients from the depths to the surface. Their waste fertilized plankton blooms. Even in death, their sinking bodies fed entire ecosystems on the seafloor. The deep, once ruled by reptiles and fish, had found new caretakers. What's remarkable is how closely their journey mirrors the ocean's own cycles. The first life had begun in the sea, moved to land, and then returned. In a way, whales are the ocean's memory, a reminder that everything eventually finds its way home. If you could follow one of those early whales into the deep, you'd see something incredible. The sunlight fades into blue, then green, then total darkness. The pressure builds, the temperature drops, yet the whale moves easily, its great body cutting through the water in silence. Its heartbeat slows, its lungs collapse safely, its mind focused only on the sound of the deep. Then, somewhere far below, the whale calls, a low, haunting note that echoes across miles. Another answers, then another. The ocean, for the first time in millions of years, has music again. It's easy to think of evolution as survival, as adaptation. But sometimes it feels more like memory. The earth remembering what it once loved. The whales didn't conquer the ocean. They returned to it. And in doing so, they became the most peaceful giants the world has ever known. Their story isn't just about biology. It's about belonging. The deep sea, patient and eternal, gave them a place to grow, and they gave it a voice. Every whale that swims today carries the story of its ancestors. The awkward walkers, the half-swimmers, the long serpents of the Eocene seas. And every time one dives into the black water, holding its breath for minutes at a time, it's repeating an ancient ritual, a promise made long ago between life and the deep. So when you hear the slow, low song of a whale, whether in the wild or in a recording, know that you're hearing more than sound. You're hearing the memory of the ocean itself, a song that began millions of years ago and still echoes softly in the dark. Long before humans learned to make music, the ocean already had its own orchestra. It wasn't filled with instruments, but with life. The clicking of crabs, the crackle of shrimp, the whoosh of waves against coral. Yet for millions of years the deep sea had no true melody. It was more like quiet background noise, steady and eternal. That all changed when the whales began to sing. Their songs were unlike anything the earth had ever heard. Long, drawn-out notes that could last for minutes, rising and falling in haunting tones. Sometimes they echoed softly like a whisper. Other times they rolled like thunder through the dark. Each call could travel for hundreds of miles across the water, farther than any sound on land could ever go. No one knows exactly when whales began to sing. It may have started as communication, mothers calling to calves or groups of hunters coordinating in the dark. But somewhere along the way, it became something more. The songs grew complex, patterned, and emotional. It was as though the ocean itself had found a way to express its memory through them. If you could listen closely in the deep, you would hear different voices. The high-pitched clicks and whistles of dolphins, the sharp, staccato pulses of sperm whales echoing through the black, the deep, resonant moans of blue whales rolling like distant thunder. Together, they weave a language that no human has fully translated, yet everyone can feel. Scientists today still study these sounds, recording them from submarines and floating buoys. They've discovered that whale songs can change with the seasons, that different groups sing in different dialects and sometimes even compose entirely new melodies. One year, a certain song might sweep across the Pacific, passed from whale to whale like an ancient tune carried by the current. Then, suddenly, a new song takes its place, and the old one fades into history. There's something strangely human about that. A culture of sound, a shared art form born not from words, but from feeling. When a humpback whale sings, it's not random noise. It's organized, rhythmic, often symmetrical. It has verses and refrains, pauses and repetitions. It's as if the ocean itself is breathing through them, telling stories that only the water remembers. But these songs aren't just beautiful. They serve a purpose. In the vast darkness of the deep, where sight means nothing, sound is life. It's how whales navigate, find food, and stay connected across impossible distances. Their voices are like invisible threads, weaving families and entire populations together through the sea. Imagine a blue whale gliding through the twilight zone of the ocean, miles below the surface. Around it, the water is silent except for the faint hum of its own call. That sound travels, touching the lives of others far away. Another whale, hundreds of miles distant, might feel the vibration, turn its head, and respond. In that moment, two creatures who may never see each other are connected through the music of the deep. The ocean is vast, but sound makes it smaller. For the whales, it's like a bridge, a way to reach across time and space. Even more astonishing is how the earth helps carry their songs. Water is an excellent conductor of sound. Low-frequency notes can travel across entire oceans without fading. That means a song sung by one whale in the South Atlantic could, in theory, be heard by another near Antarctica. It's as if the entire ocean is one great concert hall, echoing with life. For millions of years, these songs filled the sea. Long before ships, before machines, before human noise, the ocean was a quiet cathedral where the only voices were those of the whales. Their music shaped the underwater world, comforting calves, warning predators, guiding travelers through the dark. Today, though, those ancient harmonies compete with new sounds. The constant hum of engines, the rumble of cargo ships, the blast of sonar. The ocean has grown louder, and sometimes the whales' voices are lost in the noise. It is a gentle tragedy of our time. The ocean that once sang freely now struggles to hear itself. Yet, even through all that noise, the whales keep singing. Their songs are softer now, but they persist. A reminder that life adapts, endures, and remembers. And perhaps, in their persistence, there's a message for us, that silence is sacred, and that every voice, no matter how deep or distant, deserves to be heard. When you listen to a recording of a whale song, the slow rise and fall of sound, the haunting hum that feels almost like a heartbeat, it's hard not to feel something ancient stirring inside you. Maybe it's because those sounds are older than we are. Maybe it's because they remind us of something we've forgotten, that we, too, came from the sea. So the next time you find yourself near the ocean, close your eyes. Listen past the waves, past the wind, and imagine the deep below you. Somewhere out there, miles away, a whale is singing. Its voice rolls through the dark, across currents and trenches, through the endless blue. You might not hear it, but it's there. A living poem written in sound, drifting through the silence of the deep. And in that quiet, as the ocean breathes around you, you'll realize something simple but profound. The world is never truly silent. It's always singing, softly, patiently, waiting for someone to listen. There is a moment when you drift far enough from land that the world around you becomes nothing but blue. The horizon fades, the air smells of salt and thyme. The sea stretches endlessly, and you realize how small everything else feels in comparison. You sees, in this vast stillness, that the story of the deep truly lives, not in chaos or destruction, but in calm, patient creation. The ocean has always been more than water. It is memory. Every wave that touches the shore has traveled through centuries, carrying whispers of ancient life, the first creatures that crawled, the giants that swam, the ones that vanished into extinction but left traces behind. To stand at the edge of the sea is to stand at the edge of history itself. For billions of years, the ocean has been rewriting the same story: birth, loss, and renewal. Species rise and fall, continents drift and collide, but the sea remains. Even when frozen under ice or boiling with fire, it never truly dies. It adapts, absorbs, and endures. It's the closest thing our planet has to eternity. When you look down into that endless blue, you're not seeing emptiness. You're seeing life in its purest form. Tiny plankton glowing like stars, fish that shimmer with silver light, creatures that have never known the sun yet thrive in total darkness. The deep sea is full of quiet miracles, unfolding in rhythms so slow that human time barely registers them. It's humbling to think that everything alive today, including us, carries the ocean inside. The salt in our blood, the rhythm of our pulse, even the way our lungs draw breath, they all echo the ancient tides. We are, in some way, still connected to that first world beneath the waves. The whales know this best. They glide through the water like ghosts of history, their songs weaving through the dark like a soft reminder that time is not linear but circular. Each note carries the weight of 1,000 generations, not just of whales, but of the entire ocean itself. They are, in many ways, the living voices of eternity. And yet, even as we marvel at their grace, we also recognize how fragile it all is. The ocean is powerful, but not invincible. Its balance depends on silence, on rhythm, on respect. The noise of ships, the warmth of rising temperatures, the plastic drifting through its currents, all of these are small cracks in the harmony. The ocean doesn't fight back in anger. It waits, quietly, as it always has. But even patience has limits. Perhaps the real beauty of the sea lies in that contrast. Its vastness against our fragility, its patience against our rush. The ocean doesn't need us, but we need it. It has shaped our world, fed our lives, and given us stories that stretch back to the dawn of time. And yet, even after everything, it remains a mystery. There are still places in the deep where no light has ever reached, no human has ever seen. There, unseen creatures move like dreams, drifting through water so dark it feels infinite. There's something comforting about that, knowing that even in our age of exploration and satellites, there are still corners of the world untouched, unmeasured, and pure. The endless blue isn't just a color, it's a feeling of awe, of peace, of humility. It reminds us that we are part of something older, slower, and infinitely more patient than ourselves. So, as this journey ends, imagine yourself floating on that quiet sea. The waves move gently beneath you, rocking you like the planet's heartbeat. The horizon melts into the sky, and the world feels soft and timeless. Below you, miles deep, the whales are singing. Their voices rise like echoes of the past, drifting upward, wrapping around you like a lullaby. And you realize that maybe the ocean isn't a mystery to be solved. Maybe it's a reminder that life in all its forms is a miracle of endurance, that even in darkness, beauty thrives, that the world doesn't need to be loud to be alive. The deep sea is, and always will be, the quiet heart of the earth, vast, ancient, and endlessly blue. So close your eyes. Let the rhythm of the water steady your breath. Listen for the faint hum beneath the silence, the voice of the ocean that has been speaking since before we were born, and will continue long after we are gone. The sea doesn't end. It simply flows. And if you listen closely enough, you might just hear it whisper, "Welcome home." And so, our journey through the ancient ocean comes to a quiet end. We've seen glowing hunters, silent giants, and the gentle rise of life beneath endless waves. The deep sea, it isn't a world of monsters or emptiness. It's a world of memory. Every drop of water holds the story of everything that has ever lived, everything that still breathes today. It reminds us that life doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It drifts, patiently, waiting for light that never comes, and still it survives. The deep sea teaches us that even in darkness there is beauty, and even in silence there is song. As you drift toward sleep, imagine those ancient waters still flowing, still alive, still carrying the echoes of time. Somewhere far below, a whale sings, and the sound rolls through miles of quiet blue. The ocean breathes, the world rests, and for a little while, so can you. If you enjoyed this gentle journey through the deep, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Not just to support the channel, but to join a calm corner of the internet where history whispers instead of shouts. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and remember, the ocean never forgets.